Katerina Jakob watched the German soldiers flee. Streaming from the east, that's what she was seeing. Allied bombers flew above them. She thought they all might die, and then soon there was the silence of all the SS men. When the sun rose the next morning, it was the 1st of May, and they all sang the Internationale. They all sang the Internationale. Katerina Jakob saw red flags flapping in the breeze above the Russian tanks, and she fell upon her knees. And so many different voices in so many different tongues sang the most beautiful song that could ever have been sung. In German, Lithuanian, in Polish and in Dutch, a myriad of melodies has never had been such. In Russian and in Yiddish, Italian and French, emerging from the forests beneath the trench. When the sun rose the next morning, it was the 1st of May, and they all sang the Internationale. When the sun rose the next morning, it was the 1st of May, and they all sang the Internationale. They all sang the Internationale. Völker hört die Signale auf zum letzten Gefecht. Die Internationale erkämpft das Menschenrecht. Völker hört die Signale auf zum letzten Gefecht. Die Internationale erkämpft das Menschenrecht.
Hello and welcome to Revolutionary Socialist Review with Chris Driscoll and Rainer Shea. Rainer, how are you? How have you been?
This last month I've gone down quite an internet rabbit hole. I'll never be the same. It's the Chris Chan rabbit hole. This creepy person who got arrested this week for incest in the state of Virginia. Yamo and I were reacting to that this week. I wish he could be on, but me and him were talking about that. Seemingly most of the internet, but like maybe all of the internet this week was reeling in shock at the appalling nature of this person's crimes. And it's been a long time coming. This is a long, like 20-year saga of this person getting up into antics. Christine Weston Chandler getting into antics on the internet. And they basically created a communications feedback loop where they were getting trolled by 4chan, and 4chan was giving them publicity or internet attention, and that progressively made them more famous. Now it's national news that they committed an incestuous crime.
Incestuous? Like with a relative?
Yeah. It's reflective of the red flags that were there for decades.
Huh. And I never heard of this person. I've heard of 4chan, but I've never heard of Christine blah, blah, blah Chan. So it shows how out of it I am in this kind of culture. Arrested. There you go. Okay, with that, let's move on to the first of our many topics tonight. We don't have a lot of time, so I'm gonna try to be brief, which is, as you know, quite difficult for me, but I'll give it the old college try. First on the list, politics of spectacle. On the eve of the moratorium, on the eve of eviction moratorium suspension, basically, or the end of it, the squad talks the walk. The COVID-19 pandemic has demonstrated that not even the most progressive elected officials in the US are willing to do what is necessary to meet the needs of the people. And this comes from MintPress News, August 3rd, 2021, by Daniel Haiphong, who we all know as Danny Haiphong. Danny Haiphong has been on the show a couple times. He's always a favorite of mine. Always enjoy his writing, and so I wanted to raise this article. I'm not going to read it to you, quotes or highlights or whatever like I usually do. I'm just going to say that in this article, Danny takes on the whole supposed progressive, which is really read liberal, and supposed socialist wing of the Congress for basically talking the walk but not walking the talk. Their latest caper has been prior to July 31st, which was the end of the moratorium on evictions that the CDC had implemented under the Trump regime, the prior regime. And it was scheduled to end on the 31st, and in fact it did end. Meanwhile, while this was coming down back on the, in the weeks leading up to the 31st of July, the Congress adjourned and went home. So right as the Congress adjourned, not before, not when they could actually do anything and use their power as Congress members to do something, people I call Congress criminals, because they're all criminals in that US Congress. After they could actually do something, they pulled a big stunt of sleeping on the Capitol steps, demanding that the rest of Congress come back and do something about extending the eviction moratorium. And of course, this eviction moratorium came about because of the economic blowback or fallout of COVID-19, the COVID-19 pandemic. Danny really takes these people on and does it in a great way. So I recommend reading this article, and we will have the link listed under this video. So Rainer, thoughts?
Lenin said that the masses can't be ready for revolution until they've had the necessary political experience to see that trying to work within the system is not going to work out for them. The Social Democrats are always going to betray them, and the Social Democrats aren't they aren't going to enact or be able to enact, even if they want to, the changes that will benefit the masses. So ultimately, the masses in this country are going to come to the conclusion that this solution that's been advertised to them through these marketing campaigns, like the campaign of AOC and the campaign of Bernie Sanders, the squad, it's nothing more than controlled opposition, if you can even call it opposition.
Well put, Rainer. Couldn't have said it better myself. Yeah, Lenin is correct. People have to go through these experiences. That's why I always point out to people that in the early phases of a radicalization, and we're certainly experiencing a radicalization today, unlike I have never seen in my entire life. And I was born in 1954. So unlike any of those times, and I've read a lot of labor history and working class history and socialist history and communist history of the United States in particular, of the whole rest of the world, but in particular in this regard, of the United States, of the American empire. And I don't remember such a swift radicalization taking place. Now it's uneven. There's a big problem with lack of leadership. There's a big problem with lack of organization. There are some organizations out there that could possibly fill the breach, step into the breach and provide leadership if the working class chooses to choose them. And ultimately, I think it will, or maybe the working class will throw up some new kind of leadership. I am convinced that that leadership will have to be Marxist-Leninist. It will have to be a Leninist type political party, meaning a democratic centralist political party. And by the way, social democrat, we should mention that in the United States, because of the DSA, the Democratic Socialist, whatever the fuck they are, Democratic Socialist Alliance or whatever the fuck they're called, because of that, social democrats in America call themselves democratic socialists. However, there's nothing democratic about them other than the fact that they've got their heads really far up the ass of the Democrat Party. And there's nothing socialist about them. They are really on the right wing of global social democracy. I mean, if you compared them to social democratic parties in Latin America, you'd be astounded, because typically social democratic parties in Latin America tend to be fiercely anti-imperialist, because if they weren't, they'd never get elected at all. Still, social democrats, as you say, you know, I mean, they're the ones, you mentioned this last week, Rainer, the social democrats are the ones that murdered Rosa Luxemburg, one of the great leaders of revolutionary socialism in the early part of the last century, and Karl Liebknecht, who was her political partner. And just a few weeks later, the same social democrat pukes murdered 1,500 other revolutionary socialists who were engaged in what revolutionary socialists and what all real socialists are supposed to do, which is revolution. So they set the standard for social democrats. Next on the list, how U.S. revolutionaries can survive the coming purge. And this comes from RainerShade.com, published August 2nd, 2021.
To find out how to survive as a revolutionary in this country in the coming decades, you need to look at the very most extreme cases of counter-revolutionary warfare, which is to say cases like Argentina and Indonesia and Nazi Germany, where so many people were killed, and a lot of them weren't even communists. These governments, these dictatorships, carried out mass murders, mass purges that were deliberately sloppy in who they targeted, because it seems like the less careful you are in a counter-revolutionary purge, the more likely you are statistically to catch up all the communists, all the real class-conscious people. So there was this CIA-facilitated genocide in Indonesia that's especially concerning because it's been used as a model for similar anti-communist purges throughout Latin America. And at some point, this is going to be replicated right here. I mean, I think the only reason why mass killings on this scale, mass political killings on the scale, haven't happened in the United States, at least lately, because this country was founded on genocide, killing of tens of millions of natives, is because it's the core of global imperialism. So that affords it well, how could you say, the arm's length away from an urgent revolutionary crisis. It's relative prosperity and the fortification, the strength of its right-wing colonialist institutions are so strong that revolution has for so long been such a distant possibility in this country. It's when a revolution becomes imminent, when the foundations of imperialism fall out and the contradictions get so big that they prompt the masses to start organizing seriously towards revolution, that the government will take desperate measures and try to kill off potentially hundreds of thousands of people, like they did in Indonesia in the 1960s, to try to prevent a revolution on this continent. And that's when we'll need to take drastic measures ourselves, is when we'll need to adopt guerrilla evasive tactics, the kinds of tactics that are now being laid out by the Houthis in Yemen. The Houthis are under fire from a genocidal regime, Saudi Arabia, backed by the United States, that's carrying out a genocide against the Yemeni people. And it has all the modern surveillance tools. And this has prompted the Houthi rebels, the anti-imperialists, to innovate on their established guerrilla tactics and establish a paradigm of constant mobility. This article quotes another article that quotes a general who has observed that in the modern era of warfare, you need to move every few hours or you are dead. That's the reality that we're going to be facing if we're ever on the run from these death squads or whatever other means that they use to try to kill us.
Probably drones. Anyway, yeah. As I always say in response to these articles that you write, good article, by the way. I'm not too sure that that's the way things will happen in the United States. However, it is a possibility. I can't deny that. I want to also recommend a book. It's called The Jakarta Method. And I read it last year. It's a stupendous book. And it refers, of course, Jakarta refers to Jakarta, Indonesia. And it's basically, it's about this mass genocide sponsored by the US government against communist forces, or at least they said it was against communist forces, although you're right to point out that a lot of these people who were murdered were not. Estimates of as many as 1 million people genocided in Indonesia. And this book, The Jakarta Method, goes on from there to describe how the American empire has replicated this experience and applied it in other parts of the American empire. Indonesia, of course, was certainly a part of the American empire, and they were really freaked at that time by the idea that communism, well, I'll put it to you this way, the Communist Party of Indonesia at that time, prior to that, had become the second largest communist party in the world, meaning, of course, that it was the second largest party of any type, political party in the world, after the Chinese Communist Party, of course, which was larger. And the American imperialists were freaked out about this, so they took drastic measures, and they will, if they can, take drastic measures like this. And that's the lesson of the Jakarta Method. So, matter of fact, if I can remember this, hopefully I'll remember it when I'm processing this this video tomorrow, I will include a link to the Jakarta Method for people to get a hold of it. Next on the list, Pedro Castillo has become, he was inaugurated as the president of Peru, as we Americans call it. Castillo is a member of the Free Peru Party, and he was a candidate of the Free Peru Party. That party describes itself as being a left-wing socialist organization that embraces Marxism, Leninism, and Mariateguism. It values democracy, decentralization, internationalism, sovereignty, humanism, and anti-imperialism. Now, Castillo himself has said some things trying to distance himself from his own party, like I will be governing, not the party, things like that. But we will see if he's being genuine on that score, or if he was just, positioning himself to get votes. But in any case, he won. Real tight election. He's now the president. I want to also mention Mariateguism, which this party models itself after. It's named after Jose Carlos Mariategui La Chira, who was born 14 June 1894 and lived to 16 April 1930, meaning he only lived to be 35 years old, a real tragedy. He was a Peruvian intellectual, journalist, activist, and political philosopher, a prolific writer. Before his early death at the age of 35, he is considered one of the most influential Latin American socialists of the 20th century. Mariategui's 7 interpretive essays on Peruvian reality, published 1928, is still widely read in Latin America and called one of the broadest, deepest, and most enduring works of the Latin American century. an avowed self-taught Marxist, he insisted that a socialist revolution should evolve organically in Latin America based on local conditions and practices, not the result of mechanistically applying a European formula, which of course is what a lot of the social democrats did. So, thoughts?
Well, when you say that last statement, I get perhaps this is out of context. Perhaps I need more context, but it sounds a lot like the argument that Marxism is just a white thing, which is an argument that liberals use. But it sounds like this person's argument is more like the perspective of, say, the Juche idea in Korea, where they have innovated on this Marxism thing, which was formulated by a European, and they've applied it to their local conditions to build socialism there. And that this is the same basic concept I've seen Juche itself actually embraced throughout much of African revolutionary politics. And I don't know how prominent Juche is in Latin America, but it's the same basic logic that all of these places are applying by necessity, given their conditions, given the demand for them to break free from imperial control firstly, and then build socialism where they are.
Yeah, well, I don't think Jucheism is very influential in Latin America, although Mariatiguism is highly influential. And of course, I mean, as I said, he died in 1930, Mariatigua. Mariatiguism far predates Juchism. So if anything, maybe it was the other way around, although I have no evidence of that one way or another. This is the, I mean, the idea that Marxism is a white thing. Yeah, I mean, the largest single political party in the history of the world is Chinese, of any type of political party. That is the Communist Party of China. Latin America, had the second after 1949 and the Chinese liberation, as they call it. The second major Marxist-Leninist revolution after that happened in Cuba, Latin America. All of Latin America is highly, highly influenced by Castroism, which is basically just the application of Marxism-Leninism in the context of Latin America, and by Mariatiguism. So, yeah, I mean, these people develop their own thing. Africa, same thing, Marxism is highly adaptable. Marxism-Leninism. I mean, the whole idea about Leninism was to refocus Marxism on the global South, on the underdeveloped and developing world, as opposed to the developed Europe and North America, and the rest of the Anglosphere, which is Australia and New Zealand and Japan, of course. For that century, for the 20th century, that made perfect sense. Leninism was Marxism for the 20th century. Mariatiguism was Leninism and Marxism for the 20th century, adapting to different areas. Same in China. That Maoism was Marxism-Leninism. Period. Mao said that himself. He said, "I'm not a Maoist." You know, he basically said, "I'm a Marxist-Leninist." He's applying Marxism-Leninism to the unique circumstances of China. Same thing in the Democratic Republic of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, North Korea, in other words. You know, the Workers' Party of North Korea applied Marxism-Leninism to the unique circumstances of Korea, of that country. That's you know, that's what Marxism and Marxism-Leninism has been. I see no reason for any readaptation other than the fact that it's coming on time for revolutions in the metropolitan center, as the world systems theorists would call it, in the developed countries, as well as in the whole third world, if you want to call it that, or the whole periphery, as the world systems Marxists call it. Either way, revolution, socialist revolution, is on the agenda. It's on the way. And I think Pedro Castillo's inauguration is just one more sign of that same thing. So, anything more on that stuff? Next, colonialism's final form: mercenaries and weaponized surveillance, from RainerShea.com, August 4th, 2021. Take it away, Rainer Shea.
Yeah, so I published this just last night. There's this huge effort to privatize the instruments of repression, of surveillance, of the means of policing the colonized and waging war against the colonized. This largely began in the so-called Middle East, Southeast Asia, where throughout these last 20 years or so, the U.S. empire has been privatizing war, allowing companies like Blackwater and what's another one, Triple Canopy, to wage war and otherwise help the U.S. empire. And since then, these mercenary tactics, this practice of privatizing repressive warfare forces to give warfare an extra layer of impunity, has been taken to Latin America, and now it's starting to be applied to the U.S. itself. This has been going on for quite a while. I mean, in the form of things like the mercenaries policing New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. But in these last couple months or so, this mercenary company, we don't know its name, has been policing Minneapolis. It's been assaulting Black Lives Matter protesters. It's been grabbing them, profiling them, surveilling them when they've spoken out about the human rights abuses committed by this private military company. So the mercenaries are on the rise, and this is going to increasingly be the case in the coming decades as the contradictions of capitalism prompt the capitalist state to keep cracking down. What the capitalist state is doing is turning over its counterinsurgency, counter-revolutionary tools over to corporations, both to give these corporations an extra layer of, both to give the counterinsurgency an extra layer of impunity, and to squeeze out more profits from the dying system of capitalism. The same applies to border surveillance. In recent years, the Israeli tech firm Elbit has been building these surveillance towers along the U.S. southern border that are capable of monitoring every person and vehicle that's outdoors within a maximum radius of 2.5 miles. An entire indigenous community near the southern border is now under total surveillance, and it's been this way for a couple of years now, from what I understand. It's really traumatizing for this community, and it's upsetting their ability to practice their cultural traditions for fear of being monitored without their consent. Anyway, in addition to this cultural genocide, there's this deadly impact that this monitoring virtual wall has been having, where these migrants fleeing conditions that U.S. imperialism has created down south have been unable to reach safety as they've been traversing these perilous scorching conditions, and a lot of them have been dying. That's the consequence, the human consequence of Biden's supposedly more humanitarian version of the border wall, the virtual wall. And now Canada has been purchasing surveillance drones from Elbit, ignoring Elbit's human rights record. This has gone on while Canada's military has been driving towards acquiring armed drones, same as the United States. These drones are going to be acquired by Canada likely by 2025, which is alarming. This is US NATO imperialism turning inwards and bringing in its nastiest tools for counterinsurgency against the colonized.
Yeah, this use of mercenaries that's become more and more apparent. It's obvious that the U.S. is not getting out of Afghanistan, for example. They're just using mercenaries in place of American military. And the other thing that's really a big deal now is drones. I think more and more we're going to see as the next 10 years unfold and we get to the point where AI, in other words, computer programs that are able to think and become aware and become smarter than Americans, human beings. That's going to happen in the next 10 years. We're on the road to it now. Everything says, if you read about the development of computer technology, and once you've got those AIs that are capable of doing what a human does, all you need is a robot to put them in. That's the easy part because they've already got that. You don't need mercenaries anymore. So these mercenaries will be out of jobs 10 years from now. It'll be this will be Skynet. I don't know. Do you remember Skynet? Skynet was the corporation that created the automated warfare, the automated weaponry that was used in the Terminator movies. This is Skynet happening in front of us right now. It's a scary thing. We'll be just like the people on Terminator. We will be fighting, advanced Terminator systems that are able to outthink us, outmaneuver us, stronger than us. And that's what the future brings, and it's not far away. I mean, 10 years, hell, I might even be alive 10 years from now. This is what we've got to look forward to. These are just some of the reasons. You've delineated them just very well. It's a great article, by the way. You've delineated just some of the reasons why socialist revolution on a global scale, revolution that can bring down imperial, bring down all imperial forces, in particular the hegemon of imperial forces, the American empire. This needs to be brought down before this dystopian nightmarescape becomes a reality. We've all seen the Terminator movies. These asswipes, these putrid criminals like Biden, like Trump, like Obama, who have been creating this right under our fucking noses. And now Biden is pretending that he's withdrawing America from Afghanistan at the same time that a massive, major bombing campaign has been going on in just this last week or two in Afghanistan. That doesn't sound like a withdrawal, does it? These people are such criminals. And as you say, scary, scary, scary thing. They're bringing it home to us. We've really got to do something. Wake up, people. That's all I can say. We've got to accelerate. You know, global warming's accelerating. The march towards nuclear holocaust is accelerating. The march towards genocide by the American empire on its own origin country is on the march, is accelerating. We're dealing with acceleration on a lot of levels, and we really need to accelerate organizing for the global socialist revolution. Enough said. Next point. Global apocalypse. Is that where we're at? Yeah. Global apocalypse. The global apocalypse, I'm sorry, that the imperialists are engineering from July 31st, 2021. RainerShay.com. Take it away, Rainer.
The Libya model is becoming increasingly prevalent in the operations of the US empire. 10 years ago, the US and France invaded Libya. They bombed the richest democracy in Africa at the time into non-existence, and made Libya into a failed state with slave trades. And this wasn't, this seemingly wasn't Obama's intention. He seemingly intended to create some kind of nation building project for Libya parallel to Iraq or Afghanistan. But obviously, even in Iraq and Afghanistan, whatever nations that they've tried to build have been in the context of overwhelming guerrilla warfare from anti-occupation forces. So when they tried to occupy these countries, it's spectacularly failed on every level, sustained only through constant corruption and CIA bribery of the leadership, places like Afghanistan. So perhaps for this reason, they didn't try that in Libya, and they left it, they abandoned Libya after destroying it to a hellish paradigm that's gone on for the last decade. Obama admitted that this was the greatest failure of his presidency, but it was a turning point for the strategies of US imperialism, where instead of even trying to nation build, they just blew apart an entire society and allowed it to have slave trades. They didn't even try to fix the damage they wrought.
Yeah, You know,
And now this strategy is being tried to what?
Oh, I'm sorry. You froze, and I didn't realize you froze. So, I didn't realize you were in the middle. Go right ahead.
Yeah. So this dynamic of the U.S. empire intending to create some new neo-colonial government in place of the governments that they've overthrown, and then failing at this, and then throwing up their hands and allowing these places to be destabilized, is getting expanded into broader Africa, the Horn of Africa, where the U.S. empire's strategy for manufacturing destabilization with the initial intent of creating a new, more stable neo-colonial government in these Horn of Africa countries has been failing, and the U.S. empire has essentially been cutting their losses in response to these failures and allowing these places to languish in their instability and their violence. That's the essence of what the imperialists are doing as their global hegemony wanes, as the climate crisis intensifies, as global inequality exacerbates the contradictions of capitalism and colonialism, as destabilization becomes ever more unavoidable. The imperialists are just cutting their losses and letting these impoverished places, or they used to not even be impoverished, like in Libya, they're letting these places languish in instability. And this is constantly being expanded from the Horn of Africa to the other parts of Africa, like how Biden recently drone striked Somalia, which is on the other side of the continent. And they're also expanding it into Latin America, where in Haiti this last month, they've gotten their Colombian mercenaries to assassinate the unpopular dictator there, so that they can create a precedent for more intervention. And this is going to no doubt result in years more violence and poverty and so on. They're trying to apply that to Cuba. They're doing their best by paying these desperate Cubans to sabotage infrastructure, gas stations, crops. They're paying these Cubans to commit terrorist attacks. This is a calculated destabilization attempt against Cuba. I doubt it's going to work, but that's something to note. And mercenaries are coming up in this discussion again because the Cuban government believes that mercenaries, US financed mercenaries, have been behind these anti-communist terrorist attacks in Cuba. And so we keep seeing this series of trends: more mercenaries, more instability, and instability and mercenaries are historical fixtures of dying empires.
Yeah, I personally, I'm not convinced that in the last 15 years, at least, that the American capitalist ruling class has had as its objective nation building in any place where it attacks. I mean, I don't know what Obama has said since then, to cover his ass, so to speak, or to, apologize for what happened or whatnot. But certainly since their failed attempt to nation build in Iraq, which was a farce. I mean, it was a joke. I think they've totally given up on that. I think that they look at this solely as punishment. This is a way for them to punish those countries that refuse to kowtow to their hegemony. They figure if these countries are not kowtowing to us, then they're not part of our empire anyway. Might as well destroy them. That's what they seem to be doing. And now they, as you rightly point out, they intend to bring home this policy to Americans who refuse to kowtow to the empire. Yeah, Obama's full of shit, in other words. I mean, Obama knew exactly what the fuck he was doing when he went in 2011 and destroyed the most prosperous country, except for maybe South Africa, the most prosperous country in Africa, and certainly the best country to live in Africa, Libya, up till 2011. They knew exactly what they were doing. They wanted to destroy the example of Arab socialism. Simple as that. So anyway, next on the list, China's new campaign to enforce rules and social justice on private capital. These new rules, these new regulations were passed by the Chinese Congress last year and went into effect January 1st of this year, January 1st, 2021. And it's a whole slew of new regulations that are an attempt by the People's Republic of China to curb the worst excesses of criminality among private or within private enterprise in that country, and to impose some social justice and some justice against these criminals. Now, in the last week or two, you've been hearing about this all over the American media, and I imagine the European media and the Anglosphere media. You've been hearing about this in the context of the huge companies, many of them American-owned companies, that offer tutorial services and private education services. This has become a real big business in China, and China has had enough of this privatization of something that should never, ever be privatized. Nothing about education in any country, even in a capitalist country, nothing about education should ever be privatized. So that's been the latest. The last few days, there was a drop in the stock prices. Excuse me. There was a drop in the stock prices of these private educational corporations in China, many of whom are listed on the Chinese stock markets. And so the Americans are making a big deal out of that. The Global Times, one of the two major newspapers, English language newspapers of the Chinese Communist Party, did an editorial where they just explained what all the various new regulations to curb the excesses of private enterprise are really all about, and what they're aimed at, which is basically strengthening China's economy, strengthening and building the global economy, and most importantly, standing up to the acts of war by the American empire against China, that they call sanctions. And sanctions, make no doubt about it, only the United Nations is allowed under international law to be imposing sanctions on other countries unilaterally. The UN is allowed to do that if the UN votes for that, but the United States is not allowed to do that under international law. It is a violation of law. One more way where the United States is a rogue nation, a lawbreaker, and China's new regulations regulating private enterprise are designed to ensure that these sanctions aren't reaching inside China and using the minority of private enterprises in China. They do not constitute the majority of Chinese enterprises, but to use them against the Chinese people. So that's what's really going on on that. Rainer?
Right. You know, this week there were these headlines from the US media that were making it seem like it was an ominous thing for a Chinese actor to be arrested for sexual assault. Like they were saying that like they were putting these seemingly alarming quotes from the Chinese government, like your passport, if you have a passport that won't protect you, you're not safe. So even with the, I mean, it's so outrageous. Even when they were acknowledging the context, these headlines from the U.S. were trying to make it seem like this is a harbinger for some kind of repressive campaign against public figures within China, when all it is them trying to rectify the abuses that take place in the entertainment industry. And, you know, contrast that with the United States, where prior to when Harvey Weinstein was caught, he had his own private network of spies who were designated with the job of trying to keep his victims silent.
Yeah.
I don't know if they have, I doubt they have the equivalent of that in China.
No, I don't think so either. Good point. Next, CGTN, the China Global TV Network, which has an American version, which you can see on many cable networks and on the two major satellite networks. It's a great source of news and information. Anyway, they did a poll. Now, we've been talking about the demand worldwide that the World Health Organization investigate Fort Detrick, Maryland, the place where many people are starting to believe where COVID-19 originated. Coronaviruses didn't originate there. I mean, they came from bats, I think, but it's becoming more and more likely that the American bioweapons that come out of Fort Detrick were the cause of COVID-19. Anyway, CGTN this past week did a poll, a global poll of their of people from all over the world, and globally, 83% say the U.S. origins of COVID-19 should be investigated by the WHO. So there's a little bit more progress on that same story that we've related to you in the last two episodes of RSR. Rainer?
Yeah, we've been on this topic since it first became relevant, since people started speculating in early 2020 about the idea of some kind of biological warfare being afoot. And the case for that is always has merit when it comes to the United States, since the United States was born out of biological warfare with the indigenous genocide, and the U.S. has used biological warfare against numerous target countries like Cuba, Korea. But what has been kind of mind blowing, if it's true that this was proliferated with the negligence of the U.S. government, is that this virus has greatly exacerbated the contradictions of capitalism. The impacts of this pandemic have been, on the one hand, the impacts have been for the richest people in the U.S. to collectively become over $1 trillion wealthier. They've been able to consolidate their wealth and power. But on the other hand, this has brought the revolution, or the prospect of revolution in this country, a lot closer. So even if this was some kind of crazy conspiracy that they've masterminded, even if they wanted this chaos in the U.S. from the pandemic all along, if they were willing to accept the deaths of over 600,000 people in the U.S.,
Yes.
even if they wanted all this to happen, they've still brought their demise a lot closer.
Yeah. Yeah, they've lost a lot of points here, and they're losing points. Next on the list, the Hellscape the U.S. plans to bring to its own people. Rain or shade, July 29th.
There's a picture I've been gaining of the kind of environment that the United States is going to engineer within its own borders when the revolutionary crisis comes to a head here. They're going to import their most severe tactics for repression, for counterinsurgency, for surveillance. They're going to apply methods against their own people. And studying the way this has looked in places like Iraq during the siege on Fallujah, for instance, if I'm pronouncing that city right.
Yeah, you are.
The situation that the imperialists have brought about has been collective punishment, where they've been economically cutting off entire populations, where they've been cutting entire populations off from food. They've been carrying out raids, blockades, random terrorism that's designed not to carry out some kind of twisted sense of justice, but merely to frighten the general population into submission. This is what they've been doing in Afghanistan for the last 2 decades, with actually far longer than that, with their CIA orchestrated death squads that have been carrying out horrific war crimes against civilians who are simply suspected, not even based on real evidence in a lot of cases, of helping the Taliban. The CIA death squads have burnt down homes, including homes with children in them. They've executed entire families, all on a whim, all for the sake of collective punishment, of slightly reducing the possibility that the rebels will gain more ground. And of course, even these most extreme tactics have not succeeded at keeping the Taliban at bay. The Taliban has actually become increasingly victorious, largely as a result of these terrorist imperialist tactics, because the Taliban has been able to make the case to the population there that they're better off helping the Taliban than surrendering to the corruption and tyranny of the U.S. occupation, which is something that we could replicate the equivalent of here, and that we could make a good case to the people on this continent, in our communities, that they would be better off helping a hypothetical series of rebel groups gain jurisdiction take jurisdiction away from the United States government rather than remaining loyal to the United States government and allowing for these terrorist tactics to be brought into their communities.
Wow. That was the perfect recap for the entire show. And I don't really need to say any more than that. So with that, that brings us to an end, to the end of another episode of RSR, our Revolutionary Socialist Review. So, Rainer, thank you so much for the stupendous contributions you made tonight and that you are always making. Keep your prolific writing going because it is sorely needed. And thank you to all of our listeners and watchers out there. Keep on coming. We'll be back next week with another episode. In the meantime, I bid you all a sweet adieu.